Okay, Leslie, I'll wait for you to hand host over.
You are the host.
Okay.
Okay, so while you get set up, I'm going to introduce you. So Adrienne Guerrero is of Positive Delta, a change strategist and president. She is passionate about understanding people's behavior, and she has a background in talent management and many years of consulting internally and now externally, leading change management teams in large global change initiatives. She believes knowing the truth about yourself and others is what informs a strategy and truly increases adoption and improves the team and its performance. She's one of the people responsible for our Perspective series. Welcome, Adrienne.
Thank you. Wow. What an introduction. How nice. I wasn't expecting that.
So one of the things I wanted to start with is that I think it was yesterday, it might have been the day before, the days are blending, I think, as with everybody, but I was watching Good Morning America, and they were talking about people missing those interactions with each other around the water cooler. They didn't say water cooler, but they really said sort of that small talk, those interactions. People are really missing it, and people are starting to feel a little disconnected as they're staying remote longer. And Robin Roberts, she, because of her immune deficiencies, she's at home in her basement. And she sort of lamented how much she missed all of her coworkers. And one of her coworkers was doing the story. She just said to her, "I'm so happy to see you." Like she hadn't seen her in a long time. Yeah. So on that note, what are those water cooler moments?
Yeah, good lead in. So, I see water cooler moments as those accidental, impromptu, just conversations that spark when you've just gotten into the office and you're going to get your coffee at the coffee station, or you're refilling your water in the middle of the day. Maybe it's a little bit more planned than that, and you've decided to go take a walk and get coffee with someone at a nearby Starbucks or coffee shop. But it's those unplanned chats that tend to be unstructured. You're more relaxed, you're more just yourself. You can show your more authentic self because it's, hey, how is the weather? And, what did you think about this? Or did you watch that ball game last night? And it just kind of brings out your personality a little bit more. What I think is important about the water cooler conversations or these impromptu conversations is that it connects people at a different plane, on a different level, in a different context than if they're going into a meeting and there's a specific agenda, there's a specific purpose, where you're coming to that meeting with your skill set and with your expertise and with the power of you and why you're brilliant at the work that you do. That's kind of not set aside, but it's not at the forefront at a water cooler or at a coffee shop because you're just more, it's more having a chat on your deck with maybe a family member or a friend, and so you're just more relaxed. I think it helps to change the mood when you kind of change that venue a little bit.
Yeah, and I've noticed, in you saying that, one of the things that I've noticed is that sometimes in those impromptu moments, those sort of water cooler conversations, a lot of ideas get sparked. Like if someone was coming out of a meeting and they're going over to the lunchroom to grab a coffee or a soda or water, on the way, you kind of talk about the meetings. And I've noticed that hasn't really been happening right now. So what are we missing when we don't have those conversations?
Yeah, and I think that's right, because now our meetings are scheduled, right? So there's an agenda and there's a topic, and so the getting to the meeting is by yourself, logging in, you're going to your own water cooler or Brita pitcher of water, and right. So who are you chatting with? And you're not having that lead into the meeting. You're coming in together, sitting down. Okay, topic A is this. So we're missing a lot of that social connection. And I think that's, as this goes on, as we're more continuing to be remote for longer periods of time, we're really starting to feel that lack of social connection. You may get that in your community or in other ways, but you're not getting that social connection with your coworkers. And that's a big driver of a company's culture, is what happens during non-meeting times, right? What happens in the office, the planned activities that you have, those social gatherings, if you had ice cream socials, or you had food catered in, Friday morning bagels, something like that, that was always a gathering point for people to just be social and see each other as humans first, and not the skill set that you bring to the office. You're also starting, because of not having that necessarily relaxed nature, we could lose our creative moments, lose those bright ideas, because those come when you're not thinking about solving the problem, is almost when you solve the problem, right? Because, something came to your mind, and you might do this when things come to your mind when you're sleeping, or you're talking about something else, and an idea pops into your head about some other situation that's going on. Oh, have an idea. And if you've got somebody to banter with at the water cooler, then that might grow into a solution that's worth taking forward and really trying to put some effort towards. It's that informal brainstorming.
Sounds like what you're saying is that, there's innovation that happens in those water cooler moments at work.
Yeah, I think so.
Why is that? Do you know, why is it that that water cooler kind of helps innovation? How's it work?
Well, I think you're probably even better equipped to answer this, given the work that you do with design and creativity. But my perspective on that is that it's allowing you to free your mind, because it's almost that space of not thinking where the real brilliant thinking happens, if that makes sense. Just be free. We're not trying to box ourselves in, that think outside of the box cliche. You're out of the box when you're at the coffee station or at the water cooler. The box is the conference room with the whiteboard or the flip chart, right? Where how do we fix this? Taking yourself out of that venue, you're probably laughing more casual conversation. You're talking about things that are important to you, that are personal to you. You're talking about your family, so that's sparking. I'm sure there's a neuroscience chemical that's firing, right? That kind of sparks that creativity. What's it called? We talked about this a couple of episodes ago, didn't we? What was that? Yeah. What was that hormone?
In the chat there, someone mentioned, Denise mentioned, there's no pressure. There are no pressure moments. Kind of what you were talking about, and Leslie says it's a way for us to catch up on the company news and what's going on, and so it kind of alleviates that stress of what you're talking about, that formality that happens in meetings, that we feel like we have to be so present, where
yes.
Offline we're less present. So we're talking about those eureka moments. I love that.
Eureka.
Someone
yes.
said in the chat. So eureka.
Eureka. The aha moments.
Eureka moments. I love that.
Yeah. And
great.
When I think about this from a change management perspective, because of course I often see things through a change lens as well, when the way to normalize things, new things, different things, changing things, is in talking about it, right? And I even think back to Allison Henderson's conversation about wearing masks. We're getting more used to masks because we're starting to see them. It's not necessarily comfortable yet, but I think we're slowly getting a little bit more accustomed to people wearing their masks. And similarly, whenever there's some kind of change going on, it's often those, what I'd call change champions. In a formal plan, I would specifically ask my change advocates to make sure that they're having casual conversations with groups that we've identified to be resistors to the change, right? Not go in, train them, send them formal communication, but hey, if you bump into this person, ask them what they think about this change, and try to understand that and try to help them understand why there's the change. That's hard to do in an unplanned, impromptu way when you don't have opportunities for this kind of bump into each other interaction.
Yeah, that kind of leads me to my next question. So that was a great lead in. So how do you create the spaces for the water cooler moments to happen? You know,
Yeah.
Since, like you said, typically you would have your change advocates kind of intentionally, unintentionally bump into people and, you know, talk about the change. So now how do we do that in this virtual environment?
Yeah. And I would welcome some tips from the group as well, because I'd be interested to know what people have seen within their teams. So these are some ideas that I've come up with, that I've done a little research on. One thing is to open your meetings with some open-ended questions, those feeling questions that might not be exactly comfortable depending on the style that we are, you know, communication style. We may feel like it's not a place, business is not a place for feeling questions. But I think we've learned over the last few months that it's necessary, right? And it's necessary to get out of that comfort to ask those feeling questions, because that's what introduces the fears that we have, the anxiety that we have, the excitement that we have, things that are happening in our lives, vacations, or what was a vacation and turned into a 2-day road trip like we just had. Oh, not a big vacation, but hey, it's something to be excited about, right? And you get to talk about your family members, and just that allows for some of that casual chat before diving into the agenda. Mm-hmm. I also think that it's really important to allow interruptions and be comfortable with it. And so, you know, I think oftentimes, and I've worked remotely for over 10 years, and I would often feel like, oh, I'm in a meeting and the dog's barking, and oh my gosh, how embarrassing. How can I get that dog to be quiet? And why did the mailman have to come right now? And ring the doorbell, you know, and so I think as peers, managers, allow that, laugh it off, you know, invite the interruption to join you. If it's a child or a dog, like, oh, let me meet, you know, your child, or let me meet, what's your dog look like? What's his or her name? You know, allow that, because then that puts the other person at ease, and hey, this is okay. We're human, right? Remember, we have to remember we're human first. And I think that's the biggest key of trying to create this in a virtual setting.
So we've got, I love those. Those are so great. And we've got some really great ones in the chat as well. So Denise says, our team occasionally invites someone from another department to join us in our morning calls to find out how they're doing individually, as well as what things that are going on in their department. So I really like that, you know, reaching out to someone that you normally don't connect with. Mm-hmm. And then Tom said something that actually happened to me yesterday: old-fashioned, unplanned, brief phone calls.
Just a phone call, not a planned Zoom.
Yeah, just a phone call, not a planned
I love
Zoom.
that.
Yeah, and then what was funny about yesterday, and then I'm going to talk about, which will lead me to Leslie's comment. What was really funny is that it was a client that called, and she started off the call and she said, I'm so sorry to bother you. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I couldn't get a hold of anybody in my company to answer this question. So then I thought, well, maybe you could answer the question. And I said, sure, you know, what is it? So she tells me the question, you know, she's talking. As she's talking it out, she figures out the answer. So I never answered her question. She literally told me and then kind of went, oh, wait, I know the answer. And then I said, well, I'm glad I was a sounding board.
Right.
And then And then she kind of felt bad in the moment. I'm like, oh no, please call me anytime. I'm happy to be a sounding board. If I can answer the question, that's great. But what I loved about that was just the fact that she answered her own question and the interruption was welcomed for me because it reset my brain. So yeah, I loved it and it was really great. And so that kind of brings me over to Leslie's point, is that Leslie has said that she hasn't had some success with some of this, the open-ended feelings and in the meetings, and she's tried to call colleagues, but truthfully, it just doesn't feel the same. Like she's, you know, and I think for a lot of people, that's the big barrier, is that it just doesn't feel as authentic. So what are some thoughts around that that might help? And Jennifer says, and then I'll let you talk.
Oh, good. Jennifer's got an idea.
Yeah, our group will take time out to talk about one attribute another team member brings to the table. It reminds us of our individual values. So they really create a space to really appreciate and show gratitude and to each other, which I think is great. So
I think that open-ended feeling questions can be powerful if trust is already established. And so if you don't have that trust, I think that it makes it just that much harder. And I think over the phone or over video, there's just, it's almost like less, I don't know, less pressure to respond, because you don't necessarily have that person right in front of you, like, so how are you feeling, you know, and kind of leaning in, and I really want to know. And maybe that's okay. And I think the best way to handle a situation like that is to not pressure somebody, but to keep that door open, you know, and maybe just say, well, you know, I'm always here if you ever want to talk, if there's something going on. And maybe there will be another time that's better. Maybe there's others around and they don't feel like opening up, or they feel that they can't, not because of you, but because of something that's going on around them in their environment. And that's always a possibility too. So I think leaving that door open, you know, for that opportunity, is a good idea. So some other ideas that I've found is to put it on the agenda and actually schedule it. And what I mean by that is to plan some fun activities. And so it sounds like, you know, some participants have shared that, you know, like they're planning to bring somebody else in, or they have a kind of a, you know, those icebreakers that all of us facilitators are so good at introducing. But to really, you could start your meetings with things like that, or schedule separate meetings just for the fun things. And it could be show and tells. It could be, does somebody have a hobby that they want to do a knitting, you know, learn how to knit for 30 minutes, you know, a 30-minute intro to knitting? Or is somebody a culinary expert? Could you do a demo at cooking the best, grilling the best steak, or, you know, anything like that? Introduce your pets. It's just fun things to try to bring that social aspect in, even though it's still virtual. Silly questions. Sounds like we saw that suggestion. You know, maybe there's a stump the CEO kind of, you know, contest or something that tries to just bring some fun back into the environment, so it's not every meeting is work. Some companies have created either whatever their IM platform is, Teams or Slack channel, that is intended specifically for informal chat. And it just kind of runs, and it could be anybody could throw out a topic, like about a baseball game, or, hey, did this last night, or this was fun, found this cool recipe, whatever is of interest to those groups of people. And it just sort of keeps rolling. And that might simulate a little bit more of the turn your chair around or bump into somebody at the water cooler and have a chat about something. There are a slew of online games, like Pictionary style games or trivia games, and these also can run kind of for long periods of time, and you pop in and pop out as your time allows, but that creates a little bit more community and connection. I think of, in office spaces, if they have, trivia boards or things like that, that you might walk past and, maybe it's, I don't know, an ongoing tic-tac-toe game or something where you go and you mark your spots. And, we're trying to migrate those in-person activities that you had in the office to a virtual setting. That's going to help to foster those relationships. And I think those, none of this necessarily will spark creativity or innovation, but I think what it does do is it builds community, fosters those relationships, and then those things in time can spark that creativity and that innovation.
Yeah, so in the chat, we have someone that talks about they set up a virtual bingo for employees to enjoy some fun time and have a social moment. And it's about 30 minutes in the lunch hour. So they've kind of, going back to your point of scheduling it, and they've scheduled it for lunch so you can take 30 minutes of your lunch and just do something fun with your coworkers.
Yeah.
There was Adlin. And then Tom said something that was really interesting, going back to the open-ended questions. So he made a point of saying that sometimes that's very comfortable for extroverts, but for introverts, that might be a little bit daunting and feel like it's a pressure situation. So kind of in thinking about that, I think your suggestion about the chat functions that people have in their companies, that's really helpful. I know I enjoy doing that because that allows me that, to be able to chat with someone, but not feel like I'm having to talk to them. So yeah, I think that's really great.
And I think about gamers, right? So who feel a huge sense of community in a completely virtual environment, and they will never meet those people, right? And yet they're friends.
Yeah.
So when you think about that thinking, bringing that to remote working situation, and what are those things? Well, they've got a shared purpose. They're virtually, but it's for a shared purpose. They're teaming together, they're working together, or they're working against each other, or some kind of contest. But it's and they're completely fine with that. My daughter has just gotten into some of this virtual gaming at 8 years old, and and her friends will physically sit together but be in the games together. Like they don't need to be sitting together. It's like for them it's just it's bonus, but not required. They still feel connected. So it's almost disconnecting our own expectations about that social interaction, and maybe let going of, no, it has to be in person, and just really embracing the virtual sense of that social connection.
Yeah, Tom made a point of talking about, letting people know in advance that you're scheduling this time for, for fun and spontaneity.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and
some people do not like spontaneity.
Right. Yeah,
they might not miss the water cooler either too much. Right. It might have been a distraction to their day.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that there's something to that idea that, thinking about age, the reality is that some of us that are a little bit older, we're accustomed to having those physical interactions to connect with people. And, I think for some younger people that are very comfortable with technology as it stands, they're really comfortable with building those relationships, online, and it's easier for them. I was kind of thinking about my niece who's 6, she's going to be 7 next month. And I remember when she was 3, her idea of talking to me was seeing me on the phone. So when her dad would say, well, I'm talking to, your aunt, she would look at him and she'd say, no, you're not, because she didn't see me on the phone. In her mind, we weren't having a conversation. So he's arguing with a 3-year-old that he's talking to his sister on the phone, which I always thought was so funny, but it really is telling of how, just as technology grows and, people this is their only experience of the workplace,
Right.
for example.
Right. So this is normal, like it's
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
your niece, it's normal to have a video conversation.
Yeah.
It's not normal to not see video.
Yeah, exactly.
So that feels foreign to her. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the opposite of
The
what
total
most of us
opposite.
think.
So
Hmm.
we only have about 3 to 4 minutes. So my last question for you is, if I'm not the leader of an organization, how do I help my boss understand the importance of these water cooler moments, the importance of really connecting and building these relationships with my coworkers?
I think that the most effective approach would vary based on the style of that leader, right? Because it's a lot of it, again, it's our lens and how we're seeing things. So it depends on where that leader's coming from and how they feel about these kinds of interactions. Could be that they're just not thinking about it. They're more task focused. Could be that they're not comfortable with it, so they don't think anyone else is comfortable with it. So I would recommend sharing stories. I think stories or observations are very powerful. And that's a segue to next week's session, by the way.
I see that.
I didn't even plan that.
Yeah.
But observing other teams having done this and presenting the positive response of those casual conversations. Hey, I've noticed that, the sales team, they get together and they have this online game going and everybody seems to just be getting along really well. And I didn't even see that kind of interaction when we were all in the office, and now they seem to be getting along really well. I wonder if we should try something like that, just kind of opening it up as a suggestion because you've observed something, because then you're presenting kind of facts, right? And I think if there's a way to highlight any effects on productivity or engagement, if you had hard numbers, like, oh, this team, solved this problem twice as fast as they would have if they were holed up in a conference room because they were doing things, having to do things virtually, but it turned out they utilized this tool and had all this casual chatter going on. And in the middle of that, boom, they had this idea that solved the problem, which is faster than they've ever solved a problem like that before. Showing like a case, kind of almost a case study, is what I would recommend. And I think I think that observation, and as much as you can present facts, evidence, is really powerful for leaders who just might not be seeing that on their own.
Yeah, and the results too. I think that's the other thing, is that if they're seeing that increase in productivity, that increase in revenue or enrollment or whatever the
engagement scores, right?
Yeah, whatever the metric is that shows that the business is successful, I think being able to kind of present that to your boss really helps them understand that those water cooler moments are not just about wasting time, that there's a lot of great innovation and ideas that can come out of that.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's also, Google it, because there's some great articles out there. So if it's somebody who's more research based, you could say, and I read this article that supports my findings, right? You can really hit them hard with some research and evidence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in the chat, they're talking about, making sure, having surveys to make sure that some of these ideas that you've talked about fit the culture of the company that you're in. Because going back to your point, Adrienne, if my boss is not that type of person that really understands or is comfortable in this type of, environment of, having more informal meetings, helping them, see that this will help the culture, or maybe finding things that fit more into the culture would be really helpful. So I think those were great suggestions in the chat. So we are at time. We're 1 minute over.
Oh boy.
So closing thoughts and next sessions?
Well, I think, not to belabor anything, but I think, there's definite benefit in those water cooler conversations, right? And I think you can't force culture. We know that. And if your culture was not to have this kind of conversation in office space, it's really not going to happen in a virtual space. But if it was happening and there were many opportunities for those kinds of interaction, as much as you can migrate that to your new virtual setting, because let's face it, I think this is going to be going on for a while. We have to start normalizing this, and you don't want to lose the culture that you've already created unless you're embarking on a true cultural change, in which case that's a whole other seminar.
Well, thank you for the time, and this has been so wonderful, Adrienne, and we really appreciate the insight of the water cooler. And
of course,
thank you everyone for participating. And next Wednesday, actually with Adrienne's lead in there, we're going to be talking about how to connect through story. So how to use story to be able to connect through a lot of different concepts, ideas, and even implement some things in your organization. So Jan Sugar of Sugar Inc. will be doing that, and it's going to be a fun session like this one. So thank you.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Leslie. Thanks everyone for joining. It's been fun.